Thanks, and good morning, everyone. So, yesterday was a great day. At least it was for me. It was really impactful to hear all of the great speakers share their practical tips and insights about finding and grooming or growing high potentials. And it was a consistent theme that I heard, that it seems that having a learning orientation or being learning agile seems to be a component, an important component of determining who can be considered a high potential. Dr. Alan Church, he described how Pepsi uses learning agility in their growth dimension as part of their lead model. At Nestle, Amy Curtis described actually how learning agility is really being used as a distinct measure of potential in that company. SunTrust Bank and others talked about the importance of learning from experience or having the ability to adapt as being a distinctive way to describe potential. What I noticed from all of these descriptions yesterday was one theme that certainly did emerge was learning agility seems to be on the tip of our tongues right now, especially as relates to potential and describing potential. So this morning, I'd like to take an opportunity to codify some of these descriptions of learning agility, to provide the learning agility backstory, if you will, where it comes from, why it matters, what it looks like, how it comes to life in people, and how it is adding value as a way to be one of those important ingredients in that recipe that we're all trying to figure out. What makes a hypo? A few minutes about how learning agility plays into, from an origin standpoint, the behaviors that differentiate success, and also how it's tied to the research on derailment, on executive derailment. And one of the things that we know about that is going to relate back to this little exercise. So in terms of the objectives that we're going to be covering this morning, like I said, it's going to be the backstory of learning agility and how it makes a difference in identifying and developing high potentials. We're going to explore the research behind learning agility. I promise I'm not going to be a talking head from that standpoint, but really talk about the most important seminal research around the foundations of learning agility. And then we're going to spend some time distinguishing between what we've been talking about yesterday, what I heard quite a bit, especially in the SunTrust Bank presentation and in Amy's Nestle presentation, is how do we distinguish between high potentials, which we would identify as being high in learning agility, and those other high performers that are critical to the organization, those high functional technical professionals. I think SunTrust Bank called them top professionals, or no, it was Amy, I think, that might have called them that, but that was a great term. So just a little bit in terms of, you've probably either seen this in something like this in your own organization, or you're experiencing it, that this confluence of external forces that are pressing on our businesses, our organizations. And of course, because we know, we're all sort of in the choir from the standpoint of realizing that business challenges and talent strategy challenges are absolutely linked. Some of these external forces we're hoping are more temporal. Financial scandals, corporate scandals, hopefully aren't something that are here to stay. But other things are here to stay. Disruptive technology, globalization, changing demographics. And all of these external forces are pressing on businesses. The kind of things I'm hearing from clients in this kind of environment is, from a business strategy challenge, is we're underperforming. We don't have the ability to quickly innovate, whether it's to keep up with market conditions or to stay ahead of the curve. We have more of an operational focus and not enough focus on strategy. And then this translates into their talent strategy challenges. And what I'm hearing there are things like the hire didn't fit the culture, my peers don't promote the right people, we place people in the wrong jobs. It's almost like a poor portfolio management process or strategy. So in this environment, obviously, of these pressing external forces, we also have the phenomenon that jobs are getting bigger. And this is happening at the CEO level for certain. a large chemical manufacturing company, multinational, their retired CEO attended a reception in his honor, and he was going around glad-handing, meeting the new or the current business leaders, etc. And when he was introduced to one particular business unit leader and asked him, "Tell me about your job," after the business unit leader had described his role, the retired CEO was kind of taken aback, and he said, "That used to be my job as CEO." So in that company and so many others like it, jobs are getting bigger. And it's not just at the C-suite level, it's happening all the way down the ranks. Consider your own jobs for a minute. How many of you, when you think about your jobs today, is your job more complex or less complex than it was even 6 months ago? More? How about uncertainty? Is it more certain or less certain than it was even 6 months ago? Is there more ambiguity or less ambiguity? It's happening to all of us, not just at the C-suite. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about war for talent, et cetera, because we all know about that. But the truth is that the demographics, global demographics, are very, very clear. The population in developed countries, like the United States, has leveled off. And while in developing countries, the population is exploding, the supply of qualified talent isn't keeping pace with some of those countries' sprinting economies. So what that's setting up is this phenomenon that the war for talent is describing, that Carrie Bunker described in The Young and the Clueless, as younger people are getting those bigger jobs sooner than ever. The Standard & Poor's Conference Board, of course, puts out a lot of great studies, and they published something in 2010 from Standard & Poor's that was a canvas of CEOs and asking all kinds of demographic questions. One of them was, how old were you when you came into your role? And what was interesting was outcoming CEOs were 53 when they got their first job as CEO. The incoming CEOs were 51 at the same time. So on average, CEOs in the Standard & Poor's they have 2 years less to build skill, and they're coming into jobs that are bigger and more complex than ever before. So what this does is it sets up this growing gap. We just simply don't have enough time in position to be able to build some of those critical competencies and critical behaviors that start to differentiate success, and the gap gets wider as you go up the organizational chain. So in this context of jobs getting bigger, supply getting smaller, multiple pressing external forces, we're left with the question, who will lead? Who can shepherd your organization to be able to succeed in a very complex global market, to navigate? Who are the leaders that can help navigate those waters and win in their respective market? When we think about this question of who will lead, it's helpful to think about your own organizational context. The people in your organization today, or the roles, I should say, one of the speakers yesterday talked about success profiles. Those A jobs, the ones you'd never outsource, the can't-fail roles. Think about what those are in your organization. Now, think about an exemplar in that role, somebody who you would hold up as a role model in one of those roles. What do they do? How do they behave? How do they show up? What do they do differently? When you think about those high performers and those A jobs in your organization, one of the things that's become more and more clear to us is that not all high performers are created equal. And we actually really saw that come into life in our discussions yesterday when we talk about the 9 cell, for example, and differentiating high performance. And what we've been seeing more and more clearly is that high performance actually exists along a spectrum or a continuum, from one way to describe it as depth to breadth. An example, or how depth of expertise in high performance comes to life, you see described here. Someone who has more of a depth focus or mastery expertise. Sometimes we call them high professionals, but I really think that our leaders don't know what we're talking about when we say high professionals, frankly. These are your recognized functional technical experts. They're trusted resources. You can count on them. They would be difficult to replace in kind, and they're superior performers year after year in similar job functions. Some example roles that come to mind for me would be possibly head of R&D, chief engineer, scientists, medical specialists. You name the context in your own organization. But when we think about leading in the future, being able to navigate those external forces, being able to deal with that complexity, that uncertainty, managing dilemmas effectively, it's not that having a depth or mastery focus isn't going to matter. But what we're going to need is we're also going to need, in order to lead, folks that can thrive in complexity, in new, first-time situations, be able to be creative problem solvers, and be able to embrace that ambiguity and that complexity. These are the folks that have more of a breadth focus, or where learning agility really does make a difference in terms of their performance. And these are your potential leaders or current leaders who are going to perform well in new, first-time conditions. Now, for the purpose of illustration, I'm talking about sort of the ends of the pole, but the truth is that most of our leaders and most of us have kind of a mix of both, or we fall somewhere along that continuum. But for the purposes of illustration, it's helpful to kind of talk about those more extreme ends of the pole. So, learning agility. Like I said yesterday, we heard a lot of different descriptions. This is really the definition that is the crispest based on the research, that learning agility is the ability and the willingness, there's a motivational component there, to learn from experience and subsequently apply that learning to perform successfully under new first-time conditions. Now, this definition of learning agility, folks, does not mean that if you are not high in learning agility, you don't have a capacity to learn. It's a particular kind of learning that comes to life in wresting meaning from multiple varied experiences, taking lots of lessons and lots of insights from different experiences and diverse experiences. Another way to think about it, what we know about learning agility, what it's not, is it's not related to IQ. So you see here an example of what could be considered traditional learning, or book smarts, or table stakes kinds of skills or cognitive ability, and then showing that in comparison to some agile learning characteristics. Both are needed for success, but again, when we think about navigating those waters, those external forces, and taking the organization somewhere where it doesn't even know today it should go, those agile learning characteristics in a leader are really going to make a difference. So people who are learning agile, how this takes shape is they are people who seek and they have more diverse experiences in which to draw lessons from. They enjoy complex challenges and the complex problems that come with those challenges. And they end up getting more out of those experiences because they make sense of them. They reflect, they gain insights, they internalize, and they basically distill those experiences down to rules of thumb or principles that they can then apply to a situation that may not have the exact same characteristics, but has that underlying principle that makes sense. And as a result, when they're thrust into that new situation, that unknown situation, they're able to perform better because they are equipped with those approaches. One way to think about it, imagine you've got two leaders standing in front of you. Both have a reputation for performing well and doing great. A huge, complex, new problem hits. One of those high performers has a kit bag with about 10 different approaches and ideas to solve problems for him or her to draw upon. The other high performer has an accordion file with 1,000 approaches and ideas. Which one would you follow? Some other research from the derailment literature is that the executives that derailed had blind spots. They didn't really think they needed a lot of feedback. You know, in fact, I remember talking to one gentleman whose career kind of went into eclipse, and he said, well, I got it through 60 about 5 years ago, and that was really helpful. So he was kind of done, basically. See laughs and head nods, so that's still happening. So as a result, they have untested or underdeveloped competencies. They just keep doing lather, rinse, repeat, doing the same thing. And what ends up happening, because we know that so much of this kind of derailment happens either from an interpersonal relationship standpoint or transitions from the known to the unknown. Not being able to give up control in those circumstances can happen a lot, and in some of the extreme cases, these executives seem to have quit learning. So going back to the mantra, remember Amy's mantra from yesterday? Performance is looking back, potential is looking forward, right? Did I get it right, Amy? Awesome, okay, I can be taught. That's why we think about learning agility as being related to potential, because it's not so much what the person's accomplished in the past, but what they're going to be able to do when they are faced with that new business challenge, those changing situations that are going to require new behaviors and new attitudes. Those agile learners, they step out of their comfort zone. So, who can tell me who this is? Richard Branson, that's right, founder of Virgin Group. We talk about Richard Branson as an example of learning agility for several reasons. Some of the ways that his learning agility comes to life, he describes it. He says, my whole education has been an education of life. Every day I'm learning something new. I've gotten involved with a lot of different things. Yeah, he's gotten involved with a lot of different things. What has his journey been? What was his first job, or his first company, or his first endeavor? Anybody shout it out? Yeah, before Virgin Records, it was Virgin Magazine. It was an alternative music magazine that he then parlayed into a record company, which, okay, kind of the same industry, but a big, big leap from that standpoint. And then to the Virgin mega stores back when music stores actually existed in life. But then he made a hard left. And he went into airlines. What? And then he parlayed that into telecommunications, rail, and now even space travel. Richard Branson is very curious. He has an inquisitiveness that's insatiable, and that's what keeps driving him to do new and different things. Now, I will tell you, or I will ask, has everything that Richard Branson is, does he have the Midas touch? Has everything that he's touched been successful, that he's tried? Has anybody ever heard of Virgin Cola? Yeah, he tried to take on Coke and Pepsi. I don't know if Alan Church is still here, but they failed. I guess it only came out in Britain, and from what my colleagues who had the misfortune of tasting it back in the 90s, I guess it just didn't taste very good. So being learning agile does mean that you're going to embrace risk. Doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to have successes, but on a whole, on balance, people like Richard Branson, and obviously I'm holding him up more as a role model, they are able to be successful when they take on that new unknown. This is just some codified literature, research literature, some results of some validation studies that we've done over the years, in the 20-plus years that we've been studying learning agility. We know from an ROI standpoint, when you think about it in your high potential programs, that leaders who are high in learning agility, they get promoted faster, they get promoted closer to the top, they're deemed more competent, they earn higher salaries, which never a bad thing for someone, and they perform better once they're promoted, once they're put into that new first-time role. So where does learning agility come from? There's actually two major streams of research, primary research, that learning agility emanates from. For those of you, if I could get a show of hands of who's familiar with the Lessons of Experience studies from the Center for Creative Leadership. A big stream of research came from that compilation of data. And Bob Eichinger and Mike Lombardo, who are the two founders of Lominger, Mike Lombardo is actually one of the authors of the Lessons of Experience, they took a look at all that data and realized that there were common behaviors and common themes that manifested in those successful executives. So learning agility comes from the research on what behaviors are most important for executive success, and then why executives derail, which we talked about a moment ago. So it was from this research that learning agility was born at Lominger. Mike Lombardo and Bob Eichinger coined the phrase and have much of the seminal research on it, on the construct. Some supporting research that, and I know you all are going to be getting these slides, or some of you already have them. Roger Sternberg, he does work in practical intelligence, or street smarts, as opposed to book smarts. And then Warren Bennis, in Geeks and Geezers, described that regardless of age, a common element of success was this insatiable curiosity and getting meaning from crucible experiences. So, I already said learning agility is not associated with IQ. There's not a big correlation there. What we do know is that these behaviors, that someone who is learning Agile has a common set of behaviors that manifest, which means that it comes to life as a sort of a researchy way to say it, as a meta-competency. But basically it's a set of behaviors, and because it's behavioral, you can see and observe it in others and in yourself, and most importantly, unlike IQ, it is developable. It is something that you can grow. So the way that we see learning agility coming to life, and I was talking to Amy at the break, and Amy Curtis from Nestle, and the looking at learning agility from a behavioral standpoint is really helpful from a potential standpoint. The ways that we articulate, or that the construct is articulated, is through 5 factors: mental agility, people agility, change agility, results agility, and importantly, self-awareness. But you can spot learning agility informally. Think about the people that you interact with. Think about those that when you're trying to nominate for a high potential program. Try to think about these questions. How does this person deal with difficult concepts, deal with difficult people? How broad is this, or multifaceted is their perspective? How quickly do they learn and adapt, and how would they be able to take on a new function, something that's unknown for them? So, in the interest of time, how are we doing on time?
About 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, awesome. So this is going to be speed round. But I do want to point out, we've been talking a ton about breadth, learning agility, high potential. That's the name of the conference, right? But I do want to take a moment to talk about the difference between depth and breadth a little bit more. We already know, is Branson, breadth, right? Highly learning agile. I wish he'd let me do via Edger choices on him. So when you go broad in terms of your talent, someone like Richard Branson, who's highly learning agile, or hypo, is going to easily learn, is going to perform well under those new and tough conditions. They're not going to be the easiest people to manage. They're going to be impatient. They get bored really easily. They like to try different approaches. You can think about them as promotable outside of their areas, especially into general management and senior leader roles. Who knows who this is? Sully. Sully, the U.S. Airways Miracle on the Hudson, when he accomplished that feat, he had 19,000 hours of flight time, which is more than twice, or almost twice as much as Malcolm Gladwell describes in Outliers. He was safety director for the Airline Pilots Association. He was called upon by the NTSB and the Air Force to investigate accidents. When he was interviewed in 60 Minutes, he said, that day, he said, I needed to touch down with the wings exactly level. I needed to touch down with the nose slightly up. I needed to touch down at a rate of descent that was survivable. I needed to touch down at flying speed, just above flying speed, but not below. And I needed to do all of these things simultaneously. Someone like Sully is going to continue to be critically valuable in your organization because they have that depth, that mastery, that continued honing of skills in an area that they're passionate about. These are the people that are superior performers year after year. They can be counted on in a crisis. They may not aspire to broader leadership roles. And if I can leave you with one thought today, even though I've been talking a lot about learning agility, and it absolutely is a critical differentiator for high potentials, let's not forget about these folks, the Sullys. They're extremely, extremely important. Some of our new research at Korn Ferry is really focusing on what makes a high professional or someone who's a high master a high master. Think about that day, that U.S. Airways Miracle on the Hudson. Did everybody know that Richard Branson's a pilot? Who would you have rather had at the helm that day? It's about success profiles, like the talent management senior leader at SunTrust Bank talked to us about. I want Sully behind the wheel, behind the, whatever it would be, at the helm in that plane. But if I'm starting up a new emerging market, if I'm dealing with interpersonal, cultural, politically tense situations, I might want Branson. It's about portfolio management, but in this case, it's about managing your high performers. So we don't have time to really talk about this, but I encourage you to think about your own organization. What are the roles in your context for your high potentials and your high agile learners? And conversely, or also, what about your high professionals, mastery-oriented? Think about those roles, because chances are you've got A jobs that you need both of those. Again, high professionals, it's been pretty easy up to now to quantify what good looks like, what high performance looks like in a defined role. But before learning agility, it really was hard to be able to identify that special something or what it is that's going to make someone in that potential looking forward in those future unknown situations. So learning agility, as you have seen manifest in talking, with your colleagues, it is and can provide a relatively objective measure of potential. And this is pretty obvious in terms of how it can come to help take shape in organizations, but I want to take a moment to, before I close out, just to have you think about more and more employee-driven development. How many of you have more of a focus on sort of employees driving their own development in the organization? Think about learning agility from this standpoint, and think about how we are all dealing in this VUCA, this complex world with these external forces. If I'm driving my own development, I can build my learning agility by seeking out diverse experiences to learn from, wresting meaning, getting multiple lessons from those so that it'll arm me. It's like an insurance policy for an uncertain future when I move into that.